All right, I think we are ready to go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Housing Month in Prince George's County. I am Angie Rogers, Deputy CAO for Economic Development for Prince George's County. I have the privilege of serving in the administration for County Executive Angela Also Brooks. And my job is to translate our roughly 498 square miles into meaningful economic development. And that is jobs, amenities, and housing. Earlier this year, County Executive Also Brooks announced her economic development platform during her State of the County address. In that platform, we set an economic development vision for Prince George's County to grow a diverse, dynamic, and sustainable ecosystem that supports the county's goals to be the economic engine of both the region and the state. As part of that vision, we set specific housing goals to build 26,000 new units by 2030, 75% of which would be affordable, to preserve 6,000 existing affordable units, and to build 10,400 new multifamily units. That's apartments or condos. We are focusing on our housing goals for the entire month of November to promote, engage, and encourage you to be our partners in meeting these goals. We've launched a new website, mypgc.us/housing, where you can find out all about the events we have planned for November. And after this month, you can use that same site to keep up with everything the county is doing in the housing space. I'm glad you're joining us today for the first of 3 policy panels we will have for Housing Month. Today's panel, focused on the county's affordability needs, will set the stage for all of the discussions and events to come. Whenever you start something new, it's often important to ask yourself why. And indeed, since the county executive set our housing goal earlier this year, many have asked, why do we need a housing goal? The county has so much of it already. Well, I hope today's policy panel begins to answer that question for you. Let me tell you a bit about the lineup. We will start with a presentation from Melissa Bondi, who is Mid-Atlantic State and Local Policy Director for Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise has worked with the county to complete Housing Opportunities for All, our comprehensive housing strategy, in 2018. They have since worked with us on implementation of that strategy and are back during Housing Month with an updated study on the county's housing needs. You'll hear about that during Melissa's presentation. Next, we will have 2 response panels. The first will feature members of our legislative and executive bodies, Councilmember Daniel Galeros from District 3, DHCD Director Aspasia Zapolia, and Housing Authority Executive Director Nathan Sims. The second panel will feature representatives from the county's nonprofit community, Marianne Dillon from Housing Initiative Partnership, and Sheila Somashikar, Director of the Purple Line Corridor Coalition. Our moderator for today's discussion panels is Jose Sousa, Assistant DCAO for Economic Development in the County Executive's Office. Just 2 housekeeping notes before I hand it over to Melissa to begin the briefing. First, we are recording today's session and it will be available on mypgc.us/housing to review later. Second, although we will not have a live Q&A, please put comments and questions in the chat, and Jose may elevate some of those in the discussions to come. Now, without further delay, I want to welcome Melissa Bondi, Mid-Atlantic State and Local Policy Director for Enterprise Community Partners, to provide a briefing on the county's housing needs.
Angie, thank you so much for both the warm introduction and for the partnership that Enterprise has enjoyed with Prince George's County on a variety of different housing and related work together. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to spend about the next 15 to 20 minutes talking through some of the research, data, and analysis that Enterprise has conducted in partnership with the county on the current state and future projected needs for the county on housing. Next slide. We're going to look a little bit about kind of current county data very briefly. Then we'll look at what housing needs are emerging today for Prince George's County current and future residents. And then we'll also look at some of the efforts already underway to try to address and meet those needs for the economic development and vision of the county. Next slide, please. So let's start by setting a little bit of a baseline on where we are for Prince George's housing. Next slide. Using our most recent available data, we know that the population of the county as of the end of 2019 was a bit over 900,000 residents. That is broken into 311,000 households of varying sizes. This bar chart shows between the year 2000 at the bottom and 2019 at the top, how households are disaggregated by the number of people who live within them. So we've added the number of households to the county in the last 20 years, increasing by 8.6%. That is housing demand, new households who need to live in Prince George's County. And as you see, they're split up by their household size. The largest change from 2000 to 2019 is in the orange on the left-hand side, and those are single one-person households. Next slide, please. We've also noticed that in the last 5 years, particularly, home price and home values have increased, especially when compared to some of our nearby neighbors. From 2014 to 2019, Prince George's County, which is at the bottom of this bar chart, was increasing the home value year over year from 2014 to 2019 at a greater rate than any nearby Maryland jurisdiction. So our housing values are increasing relative to our neighbors. Only the District of Columbia, the top bar, had a higher level of increase. In addition, that increase was about $24,000, 9% over the last 5 years. Next slide. That being said, our home ownership rates and values haven't necessarily been equitably distributed. So this is also the same area of data from 2014 to 2019. And what it shows is the home ownership rate by race and ethnicity in Prince George's County, first in 2014 and then in 2019. Over that time, the overall home ownership rate has been pretty steady at about 62%. That being said, only white, non-Hispanic households have a substantially higher home ownership rate than that median level of 62%. Unfortunately, in our Asian community, as well as in those who identify as American Indian and Alaska Native, as well as those who identify as other races, we are not even getting much above 50%. And in the case of Asian households, we've actually dropped substantially in our level of homeownership rate in just 5 years. So while we are experiencing steady homeownership, it is not equitably distributed currently. Next slide. Turning to the rental housing market, our rental housing costs are expanding pretty quickly relative to our peers in the region as well. This looks at the median gross rents for Prince George's County, which again is the very first set of bars at the bottom of the slide. And Prince George's median rent increased by 7% plus over the last 5 years. That is at a faster rate than any nearby Maryland jurisdictions. In fact, only DC had a higher rent escalation during the same period. So Prince George's is not only getting closer to parity in terms of the actual rent levels, but its rate of increase is greater than some of our peers. Next slide. So the reason we think about the cost of housing is because we want to think about it in terms of affordability. And it's hard to look at affordability without also looking at income levels. What is it that you have available to you to help pay for your housing costs every month, whether you're a renter or an owner? So for the purposes of this conversation, we wanted to give just a very brief slide showing what the annual household income for a 3-person household, which can be comprised in a lot of different ways, would be at various income bands for the purposes of housing policy and housing planning. So what you see in the center column are 5 different bands of income level to help us identify housing needs by income. And on the right-hand side of the columns, you'll see what the amount of reasonably affordable rent, the amount of rent if you're not paying more than 1/3 of your income per month, would work out to be. Those are the rents you could afford for a 3-person household. On the left-hand side, we have examples of some of the kinds of jobs that are needed to make any local economy thrive, and what they pay, and then what the amount of rent that they could afford would be without having to sacrifice or compromise some of their other daily needs. And as you might expect, we have some extremely low income, yet full-time working Prince George's County residents today who provide a tremendous amount of benefits, services, economic activity into the county, who cannot afford the rent levels that have been increasing, let alone the home ownership prices that have been increasing in some of the prior slides. So just wanted to give a sense of what are we talking about when we think about different types of folks who are already here and those who may be coming to support our economy and what they can afford. Next slide, please. When we think about relative cost of housing and someone's income level, we tend to look at how much money do they have to pay in order to stay in the location where they are. We're not talking about folks who choose to spend a substantial amount of money on their housing in order to live in a specific neighborhood or at a specific type of housing. We're talking about folks who don't have a choice because of what the rents or the housing costs are anywhere in Prince George's County relative to their actual incomes. The term that we use for those who are really in the greatest instability, who have the greatest threat of being able to find or maintain housing in order to meet their other daily needs as well, is called cost burden. Cost burden means that you are spending more than about 1/3 of your take-home pay in your housing and utility costs. Severe cost burden is for those who are paying 50% or more of their income in housing costs. And as you can imagine, if you are spending 50% or more of your income in housing, it's really not leaving you a lot of other resources available to meet any of the other daily needs you have. In Prince George's County, we currently have an increase of the number of households who are paying 50% or more of their income in housing. That rate has skyrocketed. It grew by 59% from 2000 until 2017. And those are the green bars that you see over on the right-hand side to show the distinction. This represents a net increase of over 17,000 households. Those are folks who are already here, who are trying to stay here, but who are doing so at a compromise of all the other things they could be spending their resources on. Next slide, please. So now that we've set a little bit of a baseline, I'd like to turn to some of the other data that we've done and really present some key takeaways of what we found from a much more rigorous analysis of all the data available to us. Next slide. There are 5 key takeaways we're going to share with you. The first is that we want to understand better what housing options are available relative to what residents actually need. As you saw in an earlier slide, homes for single-person households, 1-bedroom studios or efficiencies, have decreased by about 1/5 in the last 20 years. That's a total of about 10,244 homes in that category, and that's while demand has increased for those homes. As well, our housing costs are outpacing income growth for households in education, those working in healthcare, social services jobs, and many others. So unfortunately, their housing cost burden is likely to increase without intervention. The second key takeaway relates to the relatively limited supply of rental housing in Prince George's County. Today, rental households that make up to roughly around $40,000 a year also comprise about 1/5 of the county's overall total. These are folks who are working. They may be folks who are also receiving supplemental income, but even with that, they're only making about $40,000 a year. Unfortunately, only 8% of rental homes in the county are priced affordably for those at that income level, so that they can only pay about 1/3 of their income and still find housing. This is just under 10,000 available units. The rest are paying far more than they can afford. Next slide. Our third key takeaway relates to housing options. Over the last 20 years, single-family homes experienced pretty steady and consistent growth over the entire county. During that same period, however, the county was losing small and medium multifamily buildings from as small as a triplex all the way up to a building of maybe 49 units during that same period. So we might have had an increase in some kinds of housing, but we're not seeing increases in all kinds of housing. And we know that different folks have different household sizes, different incomes, different locations have different needs. In terms of housing quality and security, we've also noticed that the number of seniors who live in the county has increased in even the last 5 years. And yet 16% of seniors need different homes to help them meet a wide range of their needs, including, as one example, a desire to age in place. As well, our housing stock in the county has not been consistently adding across all levels. In fact, over half of homes were built in the county before 1980. So that has implications for accessibility, universal design, modern features and needs. Next slide, please. The fifth and final takeaway relates to this bottom line of affordability. Again, between 2000 and 2017, the number of those paying at least half of their income in rent grew by 59%. That's more than 17,000 current Prince George's County households. In addition, 51% of elderly senior households are paying nearly 1/3 of their income on housing related costs. And we know that they have other substantial costs and no substantial opportunity to increase their income. In addition, we wanted to note that nearly 45% of Hispanic households also pay about 1/3 of their income or are cost burdened on their housing costs, which is greater than the overall countywide number. So our Hispanic neighbors are unfortunately experiencing cost burden at a greater rate than many of their peers. Next slide, please. I'm going to go very, very briefly through a couple of model case studies. Next slide. These are fictional. These are not actual Prince George's residents, but they certainly represent some of the trends that we're seeing and probably do represent individuals who are living in the county today. One example is Jeremy. Jeremy is a recent college graduate. He's going to become a teacher at an elementary school and is looking forward to moving into his own place in Prince George's. He would like to live in an apartment that doesn't cost too much of his paycheck to cover, and he needs to live near public transportation. The good news is that he was able to find a 1-bedroom near a metro station. While he also wants to work toward becoming a homeowner, he realizes that the rent is increasing year over year while his paycheck is not keeping pace. So while he's looking for another more affordable place to rent, he won't be able to save to become a homeowner and may have to abandon the idea of living by himself to move back in with his parents. Next slide. Connie has lived in Prince George's County her entire life. She inherited her parents' home in 1978. She has enjoyed being a member of the community. However, as she ages, it's becoming increasingly difficult for her to live comfortably and safely in her home while also keeping up with home repairs. At the same time, because of rising home values, her property taxes have also been at risk of rising, which could be an additional strain on her income. Connie may need to choose between making choices in where and how she spends her income in order to live safely in her home. Next slide, please. So those are just 2 examples. There's a third example here about a new family moving, both working full-time. Greg and Sharon, they chose that they would, after they had a child, that one of them would stay home in order to take care of their baby because that was less expensive than trying to find childcare. Unfortunately, the While Greg is continuing to work, household expenses have grown and it's becoming harder to cover them on just his salary. So unfortunately, though they want to make their home in Prince George's, they may be forced to look in other places in order to raise their child. Next slide, please. Now I want to close out by talking about some of the activities and accomplishments that we've seen in Prince George's County to address these issues already. Compliments to the county for not standing pat. We know we still have a lot of work to do, but let's look at some of the activities and accomplishments so far. Next slide, please. In the areas of housing supply, that's the production of new housing to help meet current needs. The county has already completed 9 mixed income projects, meaning projects treating a variety of different levels of income. And that includes nearly 875 new homes and providing more than $207 million in total investment. That's across public and private resources. That's all economic activity being contributed to Prince George's County in the construction, all of the additional landscape architects, consultants, and then actually operating and running the buildings. So we've seen a substantial amount of investment in new construction. In addition, on the pipeline, those projects that are projected to come forward, another 1,600 mixed income homes are projected. This includes 5 new projects for seniors, which on their own would provide more than 650 homes. Next slide, please. In preservation efforts and the county's relatively new right of first refusal program, 552 homes are now secured, where before they may not have been. The county through DHCD assigned its right of first refusal rights to Woodhaven Apartments, preserving 73 affordable apartment homes in Capitol Heights. And in Hyattsville, at both Hamilton Manor and the villas at Langley, in both cases, well over 150 units each have been preserved. Those are units that won't be raised or turned into another kind of housing or another kind of use that would displace existing residents and or change their affordability. This doesn't mean that they're not maintaining high quality. It is only to ensure that rents are stable. In addition, the county has done spectacular work on its emergency rental assistance program. These are programs that did not exist in a meaningful way before the pandemic and were brought to bear very quickly as a result of the pandemic. To date, Prince George's County has dispersed nearly $40 million of emergency rental assistance to about 5,000 Prince George's County households to help residents remain housing stable and to help landlords pay their mortgages so that those rental units will be in good stead for folks in the course of a really difficult situation for all of us in the pandemic. And Prince George's deserves tremendous credit for that. Next slide, please. In addition, following the Housing Opportunity for All report, which was adopted by the county in 2019, we have seen that some of the recommendations in that report, 23 so far, are actually being implemented. This is not a document that stayed on a shelf. We have been working in partnership with public sector, private sector, nonprofits, and other stakeholders in Prince George's County at achieving more financing for housing, more support for vulnerable residents, more transparency and accountability, increased capacity and coordination to help make housing programs run more smoothly and to get more implementation on the ground. And so the Housing Opportunities for All report still provides a great guide for what are ongoing and current achievements. Next slide. And after the report was finalized, the Housing Opportunities for All work group was created. And that cross-sector partnership of participants, including some of the folks who will be speaking later today, have also made tremendous strides and had their own accomplishments, including 8 strategies advanced through recommendations coming through the HOFA. 3 of those are dedicated directly to strengthening tenant protections and emergency support in the wake of the pandemic, as well as ongoing discussion about important policies relating to universal design. Thanks to the efforts of the council, we now have a baseline of resources through the recordation tax to ensure that the county's local housing trust fund will have resources available to help support really important mixed income projects in preservation or new construction. And $2.3 million has been allocated to help support community navigators through the ERAP process. Next slide. That's everything from me. My contact information is here, and I look forward to the panel's conversation and any questions from the audience. Thank you again so much for allowing us the opportunity to present. I'll turn it back to you, Jose.
Thank you, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jose Sousa, Assistant DCAO for Economic Development, and thank you, Angie, for kicking us off. Our distinguished DCAO. Melissa, that was a lot of great information that I'm sure our many attendees who have joined us today have very much appreciated. We'll be posting that information to our website as well, so make sure you check back on the mypgc.us/housing URL to take a look at not just this presentation, but also on the recording that we'll be posting of today's video. So give me one moment while I get my screen back here. All right. With that, I'm going to ask my legislative and administrative panelists to feel free to turn on their cameras and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are joined by Councilmember Claros from District 3, by our DHC Director, Aspasia Zapolia, and by our Housing Authority of Prince George's County Director, Nathan Sims. Thank you all for being here today. I'll start with you, Councilmember Claros. With such robust information that Melissa shared, but also through your work on the council with the HUFA work group, what are some of the thoughts that you'd like to share with the group today about what's been shared and how this has informed your work thus far on the council in this important arena on affordable housing?
Sure. Thanks, Jose. And let me first do a few thank yous, actually. First, thank you to Enterprise for such a really good presentation and some new data, actually, that I hadn't seen before. And also a special thanks to Angie Rogers, the entire team, and County Executive Angela also Brooks for frankly putting affordable housing front and center in your economic development policy. Thank you guys for all of that. So back to the question. I mean, I think from the council's perspective, and I step back a little and really want to give some kudos to my colleagues, Councilmember Derek Leon Davis and Councilmember Taveras and Councilmember Todd Turner, myself, and Mel Franklin for really delving into this conversation in depth several years ago, working as Melissa Bondi explained on the Housing Opportunities for All report, which is now turned into a work group to really move this conversation forward. And I think the reasons were really well articulated earlier. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to be a community that continues to provide quality housing for our existing residents, particularly as we saw rents are going up, housing costs are starting to increase. We want to be able to attract great talent to this county, whether that's in our public safety or that's our teachers. And we want them to be able to find a home here. We want to be able to attract back our youth have gone off to amazing colleges out of state, but grew up here. We want them to come back, and we want our seniors to stay and be able to age here in place. And that's what makes ultimately a great community. It makes a great place that employers can come and invest in. And employers have definitely shared, housing really matters. They want to be able to attract a workforce that doesn't have to drive an hour away to get to the location. And I think now living through a pandemic, we can all testify that none of us want to drive an hour to get anywhere at all. We barely want to drive 15 minutes anymore to get anywhere. Once again, I think making sure that we have that type of housing, that right supply of housing, the variety of options is just really critically important. And I'm really proud of the work we've been doing with Housing Opportunities for All, the work group that I get to co-chair with our amazing Director Espolia. And I really want to thank that group of members. When we started it, we said we would ask you to commit to 4 meetings a year. Instead, I think we've asked them to commit to at least 10 meetings a year, and they come back every month and they contribute incredibly to really changing the policy atmosphere in the county. Jose, you're on mute.
A year in, we thought we'd figure this out. My apologies, everyone. Thank you. Let me pivot over to Aspasia. Aspasia, what is your response to how we've burnished or created these housing goals. Like, what significance does setting housing production and preservation goals mean to you in the role that you occupy at the HCD?
Yes, and that's a great question, Jose. And for everybody who doesn't know, I am new to this job, almost a year in it, but not new to this space. And so I have worked in different jurisdictions in the state of Maryland and outside the state of Maryland. And what is significantly different and important in these goals that the county executive set up earlier this year is that they are proactively linked with the economic development goals. And we have not seen this necessarily happen around the country in other jurisdictions. Municipalities and jurisdictions start talking about housing affordability once people have already been displaced and once rents have already reached the point that many or most people who used to live there couldn't afford them anymore. So I think this idea of being proactive and understanding that housing affordability is linked with economic development in a very productive and very synergistic way is is different. And I don't want to take this for granted because preserving is economically cheaper than having to construct new units once prices have skyrocketed. So the fact that we have a roadmap now with these goals and we know where we need to go. So we as a department are looking then critically on our tools and our resources and understanding how we need to gear them and also what else do we need to do. So I think the bigger thing is that it is a proactive vision and it gives us a roadmap of where we need to go.
Thank you, Aspasia. I'm going to pivot over now to my colleague, Nathan. Nathan, you've had a pretty robust career in a couple of different arenas on the affordable housing front. What do you see as an issue in terms of how housing affordability is framed in Prince George's County when you compare it to the region or even to some of the national trends that we're seeing in this particular space?
Well, thank you again for this opportunity to participate with this great panel. And I think as Melissa kind of indicated, as well as Director Expo, highlighted, I mean, it's never too early, right? And it gets cheap, it gets more expensive later at the end of the day. And I think this information really kind of tells us that, Prince George's County still has an opportunity to really take some real serious strides to preserve affordability in the county. And I think in terms of the information that was presented, I think everybody can see themselves in it a little bit, regardless if you're starting out in life, trying to move ahead, or even if you're trying to downsize. It's very hard to do all three of those things when it's very, unaffordable to live here. And I think in terms of the economic development piece, that's a huge indicator in terms of how we have, where we place our investment, where employers really come into our county, that has an impact. So for, just looking at it broadly in terms of what my experience is, I mean, we have a lot of assets here. Part of this, I know people get in terms of like timing and why these goals take some time. It's because the system takes time to really set up. And I think, this kind of conversation, having a framework and having everyone work collectively together allows us to have a robust system so that we can get at affordability in a much more aggressive fashion.
Thank you, Nathan. I want to go back quickly to a couple of the closing slides that Melissa included in her presentation, and I'm going to go back to you, council member. She made reference to these fictitious individuals, but we know them and we've met them, Jeremy, Connie, Greg, and Sharon. I know that I've come across several individuals who fit those same circumstances. I'm sure that in your work on the council, through your residents and through many of the different stakeholder groups you interact with, how much of that resonated with you in terms of folks who are looking to come into the county, who are looking to stay in the county, who are looking to kind of build professional and personal lives here? Have those personal interactions helped fuel your interest in this space and how you're bringing other colleagues and professional relationships into the fold to doing this work?
I mean, I think always, great question, Jose. I think always as an elected official, I mean, the personal stories of residents, of community members, of parents who talk about their child coming back and living with them again in their house, all those sort of stories And real life examples definitely factor into how we think about it. But I think for the council, I oftentimes go back to a turning point moment that happened at a county council retreat, now probably almost 6 years ago, where we had a panel, and it was both nonprofit organizations and for-profit developers who were talking about housing. And I think it was really that sort of light bulb moment for my colleagues and I, that if we were not providing the right type of housing options in this full spectrum, we were just not going to be able to move our county forward. And that housing is, once again, we cannot restate this enough, so critical to economic development. It really is the anchor policy that can drive and really further our economic development in the county. So I think it was, is that moment where we looked around and we realized, look, we're not building and improving the quality in our affordability at the lowest ends, but we're also not building in that spectrum of 80% AMI, which, Melissa Bondi did a great chart on. But, at the end of the day, those are folks who are making decent level incomes, but still could not find a rental unit here in Prince George's County.
Thank you. Nathan, back to you for a second here, because I think you represent an agency that also brings an important constituency into the discussion here with residents of not just our affordable housing units under the HAPGC umbrella, but also voucher holders. And so what has been your experience in terms of your interaction with those residents when they think about the affordability question, not just through their personal experience, but also how it shapes their own goals, whether it be for themselves, for their family, around what they'd like to maybe do around home ownership, all of that. How are they getting those resources through you? And what are some things that you've learned from them that you can share with us around thinking through this work?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because it's a unique opportunity to really kind of work with providing stable housing, but also providing access to resources that will help them move forward. So we're pleased to administer the Family Self-Sufficiency Program here, at the Housing Authority. This program allows people to access a various degree of resources from financial literacy and saving to job workforce development opportunities that can really lead to them to increasing their incomes. And I think in this current environment, I mean, what are they concerned about? They're concerned about having choice, and they don't want their choices to be limited in a lot of different ways. And so another way of really kind of getting at that is really moving forward in terms of your income and working through that to be able to be in a position where you can move up, but you can't really move up if, again, the next level up is still too unattainable for you. So that's why it's very much important for us to not only focus on self-sufficiency, but equally focus on housing preservation and housing development.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm actually going to pivot and deviate slightly from the script here because I've seen a couple of questions come through the chat that I think you all might be able to lend some expertise to as well. And this one's sort of a free for all, so whomever would like to go first, please feel free to do so. Questions have been raised around how can you still accomplish some of these goals around affordable housing without considering some of the environmentally sustainable models of development through the prism of not just what we're doing for economic development, but also towards fulfilling a housing goal. So would any of you venture an opportunity to talk about how we can still accomplish these goals with environmentally sustainable practices in mind in the space that we're working on?
So I can start with that, and then the rest of the panelists can chime in. So first of all, on the new production of housing, of course, location matters. And of course, we will be prioritizing areas around the TOD, existing and future in the county, because there are environmental and financial costs when you have to travel too far and you have to rely on cars only. So for the new construction, based on the standards of building standards that we adhere to when we blend our public resources, and also on the location, I think we are very much aligned with the environmental stewardship that goes along the new construction. On the preservation side, many of the deals we are working with developers to preserve also have this component of rehab around building systems, around windows insulation. So not only we're working to make sure people will not be displaced from their current homes that we are preserving, but also we are working in a long-term, the developers that have come our way and we have successfully worked with have been able to work a long-term strategy around optimizing those systems and ensuring that there will be benefits in the long run in operating this project. So I don't see that as being exclusive. I see that as being synergistic.
Thank you, Aspasia. Anyone else?
I mean, Jose, I'm happy to chime in on this. I mean, I think it's a really good question. And I think we're having really good dialogue on our Climate Change Commission here in Prince George's County in regards to not only tree preservation, but also energy and so forth. And stay tuned for that report. I think it will be finalized early part of next year. We do have some really strong regulations in place today, but those always need a look back provision to see how we can strengthen them. At the end of the day, a community is only as strong as I think its sustainability practices. So, you know, neither of these things are exclusive of each other. A lot of what we do, particularly within the Beltway, is redevelopment and revitalization, right? It's on parking lots that were built in the 50s with no stormwater management system and no greening whatsoever. And in fact, what's coming in is much better quality for a host of different reasons. And then on climate change, not only is preservation of trees really important, but how people access transit is incredibly important, and how people access their jobs is incredibly important. We will not succeed in this country in combating climate change if everyone has to drive from a long distance away to get to where they're employed, or where they go to church, or where they need to go and recreate and take their youth to basketball or to soccer. So we need to build smart communities, and that includes a strong principle around sustainability.
Thank you, Councilmember. Aspasia, I'm going to go back to you for a second because, you know, we've learned a lot. We're still learning as we continue to make our way through this pandemic challenge around the nature of what is essential, right? What are essential employees and why housing is so essential in the work that we do, all of these things, right? Want to specifically think a little bit more about the work that you've seen that DHCD has done around its administration of our emergency rental assistance program here in the county. What has that taught you about specifically the county's housing needs through the prism of COVID?
Yes, and that's a great point. And it goes back to the housing burden that Melissa talked about. So I think it just brought to light all the things that Melissa's data spoke about. If you have a family who has lived paying a big amount of their monthly earnings towards housing, they haven't had money to do other things, including save or including putting aside some money to deal with a life event when that comes about. So we, through this program, have met and continue to meet a huge number of people who had great jobs pre-pandemic. The pandemic happened, and overnight, because they were on a paycheck to paycheck, because housing burden was what it is, found themselves behind on rent and facing housing instability and evictions. And so there are actually people who we worked closely with, and our community partners have done an amazing job, who had never accessed public benefits in the past because they didn't have to, and overnight found themselves in a position of not being able to pay rent. And so just by the amount of resources we have deployed to date, and also the amount of resources we will be deploying the next few months, knowing how many more people are looking for help right now, the implications of what housing burden does to one's housing stability is something that data says, but real life exposed really dramatically during this COVID era. So making sure, so housing stability, it's so important. And I think now we can no longer say that, we can no longer hide it. I think it brought to light all of those things that we know are so important.
I'm just going to quickly go over just to make a reference to something I saw come through in the chat, as well as around the need to make sure that we're including stakeholder groups such as returning citizens coming back into our county, looking to make productive contributions to our work and to space in our county, looking to connect back with family and all of that. I know that we have all touched this in different ways through existing work that we're doing with members of the council, but also with some pathways to reentry programming that's happening at both the executive level and legislative level. And so I just want to, I don't recall the name of who put this in the chat, but I did want everybody to remember, or rather to share, that this is an area of great importance, not just to us here, but also the county executive, on creating meaningful pathways to those who are coming back into our space, to helping them achieve a path of sustainability and sufficiency. And so we continue to do this work, and please stay tuned, because there will be a couple more events coming out in the next couple of weeks and months. There was just an event about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there'll be some other things happening later this month. I'll be sure to follow up after this session to share that back out to you, that you shared in the chat. So thank you for that. One other question I wanted to ask this group in the about 10 minutes left we have in this panel is, where do we see the housing market tightening in the county? You know, specifically, where are prices rising, and how should this influence how the county responds to this work? I know that the county is quite large and it's disparate in terms of, you know, whether it's an ex-urban, urban, or suburban format. But through your work, Nathan, Aspasia, and Councilmember Glaros, I mean, anecdotally or through some data, you know, what have you seen the space come up, and what can we do to kind of help bridge this gap for some of our residents, thinking about how they can enter this foray, but also feeling challenged by what they're seeing as excessive costs coming around in this area?
Oh, go ahead.
So you go ahead first, Nathan.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, there obviously is a huge emphasis around transit-oriented development corridors at this point. And so, you know, just the council member's background, right? In terms of the Purple Line, there's a lot of that in terms of, you know, increased costs, increased rates, property values going up. And so we see that across the county. I mean, convenience, proximity, all of those things in most of our surrounding areas, it's really going up. A lot of strongholds around the county have continued to go up as well. So it's a lot of different pockets, but it's mainly, I mean, as far as what we see along transit-oriented corridors.
Yeah, and I guess I would add the district I represent, for those of you who know District 3, that's sort of the University of Maryland, College Park, Riverdale, New Carrollton, Seabrook, Lanham portion of the county. We definitely, the portion of my county that's sort of inside the Beltway near transit is definitely seeing increases in housing prices. And I think in some ways that has only escalated in the midst of the pandemic. And we're seeing that nationwide, actually. Combination of people who just want more space. And so they're moving out of apartments, those that can afford to, purchasing single family homes. And we've really seen an increase, and then just sort of an increase in rental costs also growing. I would also say along the whole Baltimore Avenue corridor, coming out of DC, definitely as DC is growing, we're seeing that on our edges here in Prince George's County. And in the Fort Washington area, I would probably mention that area as well, because we're seeing a lot of growth around the National Harbor. All of this is great, right? It's great for the economy. It's great for the county. We're attracting more people and we're attracting jobs. That actually is a win. What we need to make sure is that we really grow communities, right? And that everyone can find their place in the community. And that's what our affordable housing focus is all about.
Yeah, and I don't have to add anything on the location. I think you covered it all, only anecdotally, because we see all of the right of first refusal deals that come our way, even the ones that our development partners may not eventually show an interest on. But we see a lot of developers and investment and investors out of the region becoming very interested in Prince George's County, which tells you that, you know, the market is really seeing the promise of how the economic trends go in the county. So we do understand that these pressures are well underway when larger investors from around the country and beyond see an interest in the county.
That's a great point, Aspasia. I think we all saw this obviously through the housing boom that did happen during the pandemic, where prices just kept going up and folks were really feeling hard pressed to find something when they were looking to make a move. And Prince George's wasn't immune from that. This next question is going to be something I'd like to hear from all three of you on, because you all occupy these really interesting spaces to help answer this. But I'm going to start with you, Aspasia, because I think you come to mind as somebody who's had to touch this. We know that there are state and federal resources that are meant to assist our efforts around housing. Counties and cities and municipalities can't do it alone. To that end, how is Prince George's leveraging these dollars from Annapolis, from Washington, to help accomplish their goals in this space? And how is that happening at the HCD?
That's a great question. And I would add the private sector. We're looking to leverage our relationships and our resources with all levels of government, the state, the federal, and also with our local mission-driven nonprofit and for-profit developers. And there is no jurisdiction that can do that alone, right? The need is not local, it's regional, and it's national. So the better we work and align our programs and resources with our colleagues at the Maryland DHCD, the better off we are. And because they also want to see the success happening on the state, they also have they also did the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment. So the better synergies and collaboration we built with our colleagues at all levels, the better off we will be. And I don't want it to get lost on the moment that it is the first time that the federal government has stepped in the way that it has to address housing instability and housing needs. Although the work on the ground in all jurisdictions looks right now that it's hard, and we have to work twice or three times as hard to truly meet the need on the ground, we are at least in an environment where the federal government has stepped in with real resources to help us confront the issues that came about during the pandemic, and also has very rigorous discussions that hopefully will result to meaningful federal legislation that will allow us to do housing production and preservation, because those federal policies will be in place hopefully soon. So yes, we cannot do this alone, but we can do it together.
Nathan, thinking about the work of the Housing Authority, I mean, how have you all been approaching the federal and state efforts over the last 2 years?
So I would say, it's about collaboration and partnerships. And so the pandemic, I think, is really kind of exposed in terms of what we already knew. And you've heard that a couple of times already. People are either one paycheck away or they're disconnected from services that can really kind of move them forward in life. And so for us, we've been very much focused on making sure that we aligned to things that were out there, right? So you hear us talk more about housing and health, right? And making sure that individuals are connected to health resources, not only just in physical health, but also financial in terms of literacy and, credit repair and counseling, but also mental health, and making sure that we're working to connect with the Department of Health. We have a partnership with the Prince George's Healthcare Alliance. And so we're using dollars through the American Recovery Act for emergency housing vouchers through our continuum of care. We're also working with the Department of Health because through the same Recovery Act, healthcare clinics in Prince George's County receive funding to help the needs of low-income individuals. So just making sure that people are connected to it. So I think it's caused us in a good way to look at things in a more holistic fashion. So all the people that are in the chat are talking about individuals who are homeless, individuals who are returning citizens, environmental justice. We're working through all of that, right? Because the types of developments that we either facilitate in terms of its development, preservation, or resources that we allocate, we're opening doors to individuals who have been previously locked out. We've been trying to make sure that our developments are as green and self-sufficient really as possible. Why? Because not only if you have solar, your property benefits in terms of lower costs, which helps affordability, but you generate enough to throw it off so that the neighborhood benefits from it as well. So it's a more holistic fashion. There's really interesting time in Washington in terms of all the different nexus points. But it has caused us to really kind of look at things in a holistic fashion. And I think that's better for the people that we serve at the end of the day.
I think Nathan and Director Sims, I should say, and Director Espolia did an awesome job sort of answering that question. I might just put an emphasis on something that we came together about the council and the county execs team, which is to change the dynamic of how we invest in our housing trust fund here in Prince George's County. Actually, starting on July 1st of this year, we will be dedicating a portion of our recordation tax annually to affordable housing and to that trust fund. And that makes a big deal. It's a big deal for us to put our own money in because that actually helps better unlock some of these state and federal resources. And so I think I want to just make sure that we continue to sort of put our dollars in the mix because we are oftentimes able to, I think, grab onto, and of course the state and the federal government can always better position their dollars, but we also need to be willing and able and have the funding to put our dollars in the mix. It's one of the lessons we learned when we launched the Economic Development Incentive Fund years ago, which is if we put our own money in, then we were oftentimes able to unlock some state resources that we wouldn't be able to unlock otherwise. And that's the same in the housing arena. We got to be willing to put in our own dollars. And then we were able to unlock even more money and able to do even more by our residents.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that was a really fitting coda to that portion of the conversation. I'll just mention one of the comments that came through recently was around the importance of education and sort of we're educating one another here today. Hopefully we'll take this work and educate some of our friends and family and colleagues around the space of what this work represents and how it touches all of us, whether we think it does or doesn't. We know a Jeremy, we know a Connie, we know a Greg, and we know a Sharon, right? And so we interact with these folks on our daily lives. But I think it's also important for us to think about how we are bringing this conversation into some of the younger people in our community, to our schools, to thinking about not just career trajectories, but also paths of learning that they can delve into to learn more about where they've grown up and how they might play a role in helping to address some of these very same issues, and maybe come up with really some wonderful ideas for the future around important spaces like sustainability and affordability and meaningful economic development for Prince George's County as a whole. With that, I'm going to say thank you so much to our panelists, Councilmember Glaros and Director Sims, Director Zapolia. This first panel has been really informative, and I really appreciate what you've been able to share with us. At this point, I'm going to ask my colleagues, Marianne and Sheila, to now make themselves present on the panel. And Melissa, if you're still with us, I guess you're welcome to join us as well. I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this portion of the panel, and I will give both you, Marianne, and you, Sheila, an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit more about your organization and how you interact with Prince George's County on this issue. So I'll start with you, Sheila, if you don't mind saying hello and introducing us to ourselves.
Sure. Thanks, Jose. And thank you so much to Andrew Rajesh for hosting this forum. I'm Sheila Somashaker. I'm director of the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, which has its administrative home at the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland, but it is a broad group of people representing nonprofits, public sector, lending institutions, a lot of different sort of stakeholders that are working towards a goal of equitable development along the new planned Purple Line. So we have four primary goal areas. One is on small business preservation and growth, workforce development, vibrant communities, which includes a number of sort of neighborhood quality of life elements. And then, what we're talking about today, affordable housing is a core pillar of PLCC's work. So we have a zero net loss goal of the 17,000 units along the entire corridor, which spans both Montgomery and Prince George's County. There are 17,000 units that are affordable to people who are earning, a couple of years ago, about $70,000 a year. That was when the analysis was done. So it's really about ensuring housing choice for people at all income levels. 10,000 of those 17,000 units are on the Prince George's side. So Prince George's County is a significant focus for this work. So that's broadly what we do. And again, happy to be here.
Thank you, Sheila. Appreciate that. Marianne, if you don't mind introducing yourself, tell us a bit more about you and the work of Housing Initiative Partnership here in Prince George's County.
Thank you, Jose. I'm Marianne Dillon. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Initiative Partnership, and we are a green nonprofit housing developer and counseling agency based here right in Hyattsville in Prince George's County. We're dedicated to revitalizing neighborhoods and making a difference in the lives of the families that we serve. We're also proud partners with Prince George's County on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And if this hasn't been highlighted before, Prince George's County is one of the leaders in the country in getting out as emergency rental assistance to people who really need it. We're working more on the retail end. We're working with individual tenants who maybe don't have access to computers, who need assistance applying for the funds. And it is just amazing to see who walks into our office every day and what their needs are. And this could be any one of us. Any one of us could be in the same situation as so many of the residents that we're trying to serve. So we provide housing counseling all the way from first-time home buyers, all the way to rapid rehousing, placing homeless families into permanent housing and providing them support along the way. And we develop both multifamily and single-family homes in Prince George's County. We're about to close, we hope, on a 90-unit senior building down in Clinton. And we develop, we buy up and redevelop single-family homes of distress in this county and do really green renovations of them and sell them to first-time home buyers.
Thank you, Marianne. And again, thank you for bringing that up. Deputy Treasurer Secretary Wally Ademayo came to Prince George's County, and more specifically came to HIP's building in Hyattsville to celebrate the work of the housing counseling providers who have done a really wonderful job as partners to all of us within the ERAP program. So thank you for your efforts on that. Very quickly, Melissa, just if you don't mind saying hello again once more to the group and telling us give us a 30-second soundbite on the work of Enterprise that it's doing in this space in Prince George's County.
You're so kind. Hello again. No slides this time, I promise. So Enterprise is a national organization headquartered in Maryland, and our work really touches a variety of different parts of this entire conversation that we've had. One of our primary roles is as a financer, a funder of housing affordability projects and the wraparound services that residents may or may not need as part of that work. So we do help to finance the work of Marianne's organization and many other peers like her, high quality providers. We are also an affordable housing provider. We also do produce our own and preserve our own units and also provide resident services on site in the properties that Enterprise manages. I'm in the solutions team. That's programs and policies, people who are doing a lot of advocacy, trying to understand current trends across the country, as well as locally, and then trying to figure out what are others doing in this space and how we take advantage of them and tailor some of those solutions so that they can be the kind of the best solution for, in this case, Prince George's County. So there's a lot of work that we do in partnership with local governments, state governments, and federal government, as well as tons and tons of stakeholder groups and partners. We learn all the time. And so those are just some of the additional things that we've been able to do.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to go back to Sheila really quickly. Sheila, you've heard a lot been said today, and I think your introduction was really valuable around really defining sort of the scope and mission of your coalition. Hearing through Melissa's presentation at the beginning of today's session, obviously a lot of that must have really resonated because you are hyper-focused on a particular geographic area within Montgomery County, but also Prince George's County. Do you have any, when you saw the presentation again today, under the context of this conversation, what was the first thing that came to mind? What do you want people to know about what's happening in the county and how you're helping us address this issue here in Prince George's?
Sure. So I think some of what struck me from Melissa's presentation was the urgency, just that there's so much growth happening in our region, and that our housing stock is not keeping pace with the need. And I think that that's particularly true along the Purple Line corridor. I'm not sure if hopefully some of you've heard that the new contractor for the Purple Line transit project was announced on Friday, which means that whatever pause that we've experienced over the last, year plus will be coming to an end soon. And so with that, we also expect investment and of all kinds, and some of it might be a good kind of investment. Some of it might be the kind of investment that could result in displacement. And so, I think there's an urgency generally in Prince George's County and in our region around increasing the stock of affordable housing, which means diversity of housing stock as well. That was another thing that struck me from Melissa's presentation, just that You can just look at the corridor and see a lot of single family housing, which is of course something that we want to continue, to have available, but there also needs to be an increase in density. And there are a lot of reasons for that, to do that along transit corridors, to have more multifamily development that really meets the needs of different kinds of people with different levels of affordability into the future.
Thank you, Sheila. Sorry about that. I was a little slow on my unmuting myself there. Marianne, this is a good opportunity, thinking about the work of HIP, what was your first reaction to some of the data shared with us today? Obviously, you occupy an interesting perch here with sharing the multiple different hats that HIP does in the county. Specifically, what was it about this that really resonated with you in a way that got you excited about the work that you're doing, but also expressed like how you need to double down and why your work is so important?
There were really two things that struck me. First was, I know that Melissa shared data that showed an increase in the size of very low income people living in the county and an increase in the number of people who are way above median income. And it just points to the hollowing out of the middle class. You saw that middle segment shrinking while the two ends are growing. And at the same time, I know you often hear the comments of, oh, we have more than our fair share of affordable housing in this county. We don't need any more. But then we look at people who are living here now, and 48% of the renters who live in this county right now are rent burdened, paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. And it's one thing if you make $150,000 a year for your household income. If your household income is $35,000 a year, what's left over after you've spent 33% on housing? I mean, you just don't have enough money to sustain yourself and sustain your family. So those really speak to the urgency of the situation.
Thank you, Marianne. Let me pivot over to a different question here. We've all heard in our professional lives, obviously have a lot of colleagues who are doing this work, but also when we do the engagement that a lot of these developments entail, we sometimes encounter opposition, perhaps cloaked in not enough information. And so that can sometimes breed some distrust and empower individuals who occupy a NIMBY perspective, right? And so what are you all seeing in terms of sort of this NIMBY perspective around affordable housing in the county right now? Has there been any sort of amelioration of it in a way that's making it seem a little bit better, or is it you feel getting stronger because folks are choosing to use the parts of the data that they want to see and not the whole picture as Melissa presented? And I'll leave this up for all three of you to start with. And maybe Melissa, why don't you kick us off with that one, if you don't mind?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So in my experience, and I've been a homeowners association representative in a former life. So I've heard some of these concerns for a long time in a lot of different places and zip codes. I think the most important thing that has struck me is not to just wave away concerns. People who are willing to take time out of their day to engage on the issue of where and how our communities grow. That's important conversation. And so it's easy to feel marginalized when you think you have a great message and others are really kind of skeptical of it or concerned about it, or come believing that they have done a ton of research, have drawn a conclusion, and it's the different one than yours, right? We are all experiencing that in a lot of different places. But I would say that from my experience, often a couple of things get conflated, and trying to unwind to what is the concern that someone actually has rather than what they think their solution is to it. Like, first, let's start with what is the problem that brings you here. Often folks love a neighborhood from the minute they join it and then do not want it to change from that point forward, because that is what it looked like when they moved there. And that's what they want. And the challenge is that a community that is not evolving with current needs, with economic changes, will not move forward. We have many, many examples of communities and cities and towns across the country that have nowhere near the benefits, the amenities, the potential of Prince George's County. And they would much rather be like us than places that are stagnant, where no one is interested in moving in, where no one wants to look for work, where no one is citing jobs. You can't have jobs without having housing. So I try to start from that perspective on change can either happen with you or it can happen to you. People want to be able to think about things happening with them rather than on top of them. But the alternative to change is far, far worse. So what are the things we can agree on and can we move forward? The reality is that the other thing that gets conflated is a lot of folks have concerns about development, and I've appreciated how the chat has talked about things like environmental concerns and tree canopy and who are we building for and where are we building? I think that's all really great, important stuff. That's not skepticism. That's, look, these things are important, and how do we solve for more than one thing? We certainly can. But a lot of times the notion of development just as a big topic invites a lot of skepticism, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of concern. Are people just trying to make a profit at the expense of existing communities? Are they going to make promises that they're not going to deliver upon? And it's important, I think, that we uphold and require that development partners are held to the standards that we need from them. I know working with mission-minded affordable housing providers and mixed income housing providers like HIP, like some of the others who work in the space in Prince George's, they do outstanding developments, which is terrific, but are often seen, even though they're mission-minded, even though they're nonprofits, even though their motivations are in many ways really different, kind of put into the same place as every other worst case scenario. So I think trying to help educate others on what is it we're trying to accomplish in this space, seeing how the private sector can be a positive part of it without assuming just the worst case scenario for any developer at any time will help us.
Thank you, Melissa. Sheila, back to that NIMBY question. I think obviously within your work, you all are playing a really important role as sort of being an umbrella also to a lot of the residents and giving them a voice in cases where they may have never used it before or are afraid to use it. So how do you work within that space to not necessarily be NIMBYs, but to help counter some of what the NIMBYs are saying about what you're trying to do within the Purple Line Corridor area?
Sure. No. First off, it's tough to follow Melissa. That was that was a great summary. But I mean, I would just reiterate what she said about NIMBYism often being grounded in misunderstanding about what it means. If you go back to her briefing at the beginning, a lot of what we're talking about is preserving what we have in terms of affordability, that it's if we don't get ahead of change in a way that's inclusive, then the change happens to you, and it happens to communities in a way that's that results in displacement sometimes at scale. So I think it's partially that, it's partially recognizing that affordability is that a lot of different ranges. It is about people who it's about people who are accessing Section 8 vouchers to live in private housing. It's also about making sure that there are pathways for first-time home buyers. It's that entire spectrum to make sure that the county continues to be a rich and diverse place.
Marianne, anything that you want to add to this on the HIP side?
Yeah, I would say that globally, I've seen more acceptance of affordable housing in recent years. I think that people are getting the message that people are cost burdened, that people don't have choices of housing type, that people are living further and further away from their jobs because they can't afford to live closer in. And I think people recognize that that's a problem. Where it becomes a rub is when you actually try to do development and it impacts a neighborhood. We talk a lot about smart growth, and what I like about the county executive's economic development plan is that it really does emphasize smart growth. It emphasizes building around transit nodes and doing sensible things. And I know that Melissa had another chart that she didn't share this morning, but there's another chart in that report that showed what kind of development has happened in recent years. And so much of it has been suburban sprawl. Further out in the county where you have to build infrastructure and roads, you have to tear out a lot of trees. People live far from their jobs. So that the sensible way to develop is to develop closer in near metro stations. And that's where the challenge is, because again, people live in those communities. They like the way their communities are now. And to recognize that it needs to change in order to have, diversity, to be a dynamic neighborhood where you've got the kind of restaurants and services that everybody wants to have. That requires density to have that. So there's a real balancing act, and there's a real sensitivity that developers need to have when they work in these infill neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I saw a question come through the chat also about there's a need for more affordable housing development in the southern part of the county, but without meaningful public transit options down there, how feasible will it be to build if folks don't have a way to get to where they need to be? So that's a good point of this work cannot happen in vacuum. It has to happen in consultation with our colleagues at the Department of the Environment, our colleagues at DPW&T, all of those things to think about where we do this, how we do this, and how it all fits together. So I appreciate that perspective on that side. Let me move on to the next question. And this one's specifically geared towards Marianne and Sheila. You both occupy space at important nonprofits doing this work. And later this month, as part of Housing Month, we're going to be talking about the role of philanthropy and in this particular issue. What support do nonprofits need in order to continue to be key players in housing here in Prince George's County? And Marianne, why don't you start us off with that?
Okay, one thing to recognize is that this region is really very weak on traditional philanthropy, traditional foundations. There's not a whole lot of support that we get from foundations, believe it or not. Most of our income, if I can call it that, is coming through grants and contracts with the state, with the county, and federal funds to develop affordable housing, where we can collect fees from that. We have probably 40 to 50 different sources of income that come to us every year. We just string together, dozens and dozens of sources, from individual donors up to large scale contracts with the federal government or with the county or whatever. Some of the things that are really hard for us to get support for are the resident services that we provide at our properties. All of our multifamily properties, we have family properties, we have senior properties. We hire staff to provide services to those residents to make sure they're connected to the services they need, to make sure that we can create a sense of community. It's very hard to get money from foundations to support that kind of work. So we tend to get that from individual donors.
Thank you, Marianne. Sheila?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of really great nonprofit partners that do critical work that crosses a lot of different needs, from the work that Marianne does around development, organizing that CASA does, to the multifaceted things that Enterprise and other organizations in our network do. So I think the special sauce of PLCC is really the collaboration. I think there needs to be, more funding for the work of the individual organizations. It's tough to raise funds for the collaboration element, which is really, we're seeing traction with it in terms of raising capital for affordable housing, preservation and growth, and deploying that capital. We have dedicated capacity to do that sort of thing now. And so, I think the reason that we are optimistic about our ability to reach these really ambitious goals that we have is that we've created a dedicated table for folks to work together. And so more resources to the organizations that are doing the work and to the collaboration. And capital is also an important need for this work as well.
Yeah, it's funny. No, not funny, but Marianne's point, and I think what you just echoed, Sheila, is that the dollars don't always follow where the need is, right? We know what it takes to build in bricks and mortar and do pre-development, but when we're talking about the human capital component, when I say human capital, I mean obviously the investment in our residents and our people. That isn't necessarily top of mind for some folks when they're thinking about where they're putting their contributions. And so that might be a really valuable space that we want to do more in, right? Which is, none of this work matters if we're not preparing both current and other residents who need these services to take advantage of the ability to stay in place, to live in communities that are changing and all of that. So I think that's an important message for all of us. And I ask that we evangelize that appropriately to our networks, personally, professionally, through this work. Let me quickly go over to one element here. We've talked a little bit about different tools that have been deployed, and actually public service announcement, because I realize today is a 90-minute session. I realize we're not going to get to all the questions that we've seen come through, but I do want to stress that there has been really wonderful work done over the last couple of years through the Housing Opportunities for All work group. There's a ton of really, really wonderful data, wonderful reports. I encourage you to pour yourself a cup of coffee, sit through, leaf through them, because there's a lot of important subjects on there that cover the panoply of things that I've seen come through on the chat around literally housing opportunities for all. They've covered almost all of them. I'd say we haven't covered how to house extraterrestrials, nor do I think we should, but just to show you how expansive this work has been, right? But take some time to read through that. They've got all of the materials on the council website as well. So I just want to make sure folks are taking a look at that. But one of the things we also talked about was this, how we've put that work into place, with 21 of those strategies being put into effect through investments, through deployment of right of first refusal and all of that. So we've seen some programs and some policies and some financing mechanisms come into play here in the county. I'll pose this question to the group again. What is the county? What else could the county be doing to meet this affordable housing need by taking advantage of existing tools, but also about some tools that maybe aren't in place yet that we should be looking at, that the group might benefit from hearing from today?
Yeah, I'd like to take a stab at that. The county's been doing a great job with its right of first refusal and getting that. They have a team of developers, and we're one of the developers of the more socially minded developers. So they've been exercising their right. They've been sharing with us opportunities to go and match an offer and purchase a property. But I have to say, without a substantial amount of money, I know it always comes down to money, that the county can have through its trust fund, there's really no ability for us to go and exercise that right, because we're competing with a private market that has just agreed to pay top dollar for this real estate. And the only way they're going to get their returns is by increasing rents. So if we match the offer that's already on the table, we're not going to be able to keep the rents lower unless we get some grant money from somewhere to underwrite the cost of the development. So without increasing that trust fund considerably, we're not going to have the ability to really exercise on the right of first refusal. We know that the District of Columbia has been putting in $100 million a year to their trust fund, which is an incredible amount of money. Montgomery County has been putting in usually $40 to $60 million a year. It is great that Prince George's County now has a dedicated fund starting next year. $10 million a year as a floor will be going into the trust fund, but that's not nearly enough. It's really not nearly enough. So I encourage the county to find other ways to capitalize that further. The other thing I want to add is about inclusionary zoning. I know that Enterprise recently did a study that showed that inclusionary zoning really isn't feasible right now in the county because our rents just aren't high enough. Not that we want them to be any higher, but they're not high enough to make it economically feasible for a developer to include a certain set aside of affordable units that are being offset by high-end apartment buildings. It works in downtown Bethesda. It works in revitalized Silver Spring. It may not work in Langley Park. But I would encourage the county to continue looking at that as a possible tool in the future, because when the day comes that a development makes economic sense to be torn down and rebuilt in the higher density, it's because a developer has discovered or believes that there is a market for higher end, high cost housing. And by then it's too late. So I really encourage the county to look at that further and have that in place before it becomes too late.
Thank you. Sheila, anything you'd like to add to that question? And
Yeah.
forgive me, we have about 2 minutes before we have to go to a close, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, no, so I'll be quick. I would just say the two things I would add are, maybe prioritizing that funding to areas where you expect the most rapid displacement. We know that we expect that along the Purple Line. And so I think it would be a priority to dedicate resources to the Purple Line corridor. And then the other thing is kind of echoing Mary Ann's point that different strategies work for different parts of the county. If you look at Langley Park, Northern Gateway, for example, it's got a very different kind of housing stock, and you've got a high concentration of communities, of immigrant communities, and it might be a different sort of strategy that you need for neighborhoods in that part of the county. So that's, I guess, what I would say around that, just giving it some strategic focus.
Thank you, Sheila. Melissa, 60 seconds if you want to just help answer that question. I'm sorry for cutting everybody back at the time, but we want to make sure we're being respectful of everybody's time here.
Not at all. Thank you. Again, great responses from Marianne and Sheila. So I agree with everything they said. Also, Jose, what you said, the Housing Opportunities for All work group is really going deep and looking at not only what are best practices or emerging items that could be brought to bear that are new, but also what are the things that were in the comprehensive housing strategy, the 2019 document, and getting those things implemented. And they really cross-cut across a lot of issues. Not all of them are about bricks and mortar. Some of them are about tenant and landlord, rights, responsibilities, transparency, support, that were true even before the pandemic and will be true even after the pandemic. The last thing I'll say is that because the county executive and the county have this vision, this economic development vision that includes housing as one really critical part, understanding what our needs are and where and how we want to grow will help determine what are some of the best solutions to help meet those needs, so that we're really putting energy, resources, time into the places that are most important, whether it's protection against displacement, which I strongly support, or additional resources for new construction and rehabilitation, which I also really support. It'll be based on what we identify as being the right priorities for Prince George's and not anywhere else in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Everyone, it's not every day that your moderator brings up housing for aliens as part of a discussion. I can assure you that was just trying to keep it a little bit light here. It can sometimes be a heavy conversation, but I do want to thank Mary Ann, Sheila, and Melissa for the second panel. Melissa, thank you for kicking us off with such wonderful information today. We're going to wrap it up, and I want to just two quick public service announcements again. We are keeping track of everything in the chat. There's really been some wonderful questions and comments that we're going to take a chance to kind of make sure we capture all of that. So I won't be closing the meeting right away, but please visit mypgc.us/housing to view other events that are happening here in Prince George's County to celebrate Housing Month. Secondly, do take a look at the link that Melissa shared in the chat on the Housing Opportunities for All work group. We will be capturing all the email addresses that you used to register for today's event so that we can share information back to you on what this page will become going forward. It's not just going to be what we use for this month. It's where we want folks to come to learn about all of our programs, all of our resources, and also to educate themselves and others around the important work that is happening, will continue to happen, and how you can be part of those discussions going forward. With that, I just want to say thank you so much to Angie Rogers, our Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, for helping us get started today, to the County Executive for setting these goals, and to the County Council for being a true partner in the work that we're doing together. With that, thank you all for a wonderful day. Our panelists can go off of camera. I'm going to leave the meeting open so I can continue to track these questions and comments that are coming in. But I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you for participating this evening or this afternoon. Appreciate it.